So thank you very much and let us straight away start into our topic, because you see, research articles are definitely not easy reading. Even if you are an expert in the subject, an article in a research paper still takes a lot of effort to read it. So I was thinking that to lessen that effect, to make it easier, the least we can do is to present the articles, the layout, in more effective way. And you see, design is important. You can see that when plain language is defined, it says not just wording and structure, but the design. It's so clear that intended audience can find what they need, understand what they find, and use that information. So let's see how we design research papers. Now, one thing is now abstract. For instance, traditionally the abstract used to be printed in a smaller font. Actually, abstract, more people read the abstract than people who read the full paper. So it makes sense to have the abstract actually in slightly larger font, because that is read by more people. So that's a good practice. As you could see, this journal has done it. If you see a document like this, it doesn't really invite reading. It's very dense, margins are very narrow, there is very little space between lines. Whereas if you see the structure of the document, then that is made clearer. You can see there are these headings, then there are these 3 points. So the underlying structure is brought out by effective design. So we will now see how we arrive at a design document by studying these factors. And all this is not just somebody's opinions, they are based on research. So here's an example. There was an experiment. Subjects were shown 47 characters, 1 character at a time. It was for about 34 milliseconds, and next character, and they're asked to guess what the character was. So the characters were letters, numbers, some signs, and so on. So what they found that many people made mistakes when it came to differentiating between C and E when the font was Garamond, but when it was Vardhana, nobody made a mistake. Now, why is that? That's because you see, in Vardhana, this is the design, and the proportion of this to the height is lower. So that was one of the factors. There's another example, numbers. Now you see these numbers and you see these numbers, and the numbers at the top were significantly more legible. People made fewer mistakes in identifying them than numbers of this kind. So there is research to back up. So how do you choose a font? When we write some research papers, we don't need just letters, but we also need numbers, we need special symbols. Then there are references, there are footnotes, so we need small print. We need correctly identifiable characters for formulae and so on. So some time ago, when the journal Nature, which has been published for almost 150 years, when it was redesigned, they considered what nature required. So they designed a special typeface. Now, what did it ask for? You need superscript and subscript characters. They were made larger. There were Greek letters. There were italics that were made more distinct. And because Nature is a multidisciplinary journal, it covers many disciplines. It needed lots of symbols. And the font should be such that it remains legible even when read on a smartphone. So they designed a typeface that was called Harding, and you can see the range of characters it supplies. It has capital letters, small letters, numbers, brackets, arrows, Greek letters, fractions, all kinds of symbols are available. So you see, English, for instance, does not have many accented characters, but most other languages do. So names of authors, for instance, if you want to render them, you need these characters available in a font. There may be astronomical characters, musical notations, Greek letters and symbols. You need all these characters. In addition to that, the overall look of the font should be such that it fits in with the serious nature of journal publishing. Take an example. This is a degree certificate, so it's very formal, whereas this is simply an invitation to an informal party. Now imagine if this invitation were to be set in this font, it would look very odd. This is a test that of legibility. Now, which is capital I, which is small l, which is Roman 1. As you could see, some typefaces, it's very easy to tell apart which is capital I, which is small l, which is numeral 1, whereas in Gilson's or Nostranova, there's hardly any clue that's available. Meta, again, is very good at this test. Then there are fonts that are meant to be read at very small sizes. And yes, there are fonts. You can see here, specially designed for 2 to 6 points, minuscule, as the name suggests. You see, if you enlarge them, this is how it looks. But it is not meant to be enlarged. It is meant to be read in a very small size. Likewise, we need larger fonts for posters, for highway signs, and so on. So there are different fonts available for large sizes. Now, these are the two main distinguishing characters in fonts. Some have these little strokes or serifs, some don't have serifs. Then there are other differences. For instance, you take capital A, it can be a pointed one, it can be broad and flat, it can have an overlap. Small g, the loop can be open or it can be closed. The loop can be open without a gap. Even the dot on the I can make a difference. It can be a circle, it can be a square, it can be a triangle, it can be a diamond, or no dot at all. So after having chosen the font, we must set it properly. Now you can see here so much space between letters, that is not good. Whereas here you see that's normal amount of space. So we should not put extra space between lowercase letters. Spacing between words. Now you see here, this is uniform, it is justified, but this line, there are lots of gaps between words, what we call a loose line, whereas this is a tight line, very small space between words. So which is again not good for reading. There should be even space between words. Whereas if you let the right margin vary, we can go for left justification, then we get even space between words. That's important. How we read, we read not one letter at a time, but we fixate on a group of words, we take in, we jump to the next, and so on. So at any one point when we are fixating, only a few characters are focused. That is how we read. We fixate, absorb, then jump. So these are called fixations and sacsets. So that is how we read, and we need to take that into account because spacing between words matters in this case. Then the length of the line should not be too long. If they're too long, we often start reading the third line, or we read the same line twice, which is not a good thing. So the line should be about 65 characters, including spaces. That's a good line length. And we can change the line length by either using wider margins or using larger letters. Line shouldn't be too close either, should be open, white space. You see here, very long lines, 138 characters. That's very long. So instead we can go in for 2 columns. So in that case, we get smaller lines. or it can even 3 columns. So we'll see examples of this. Now this is, you see, 1 column, but the lines are very long. Though there is white space here, to some extent lines can be manageable. There is major heading in capital letters, then there is a next heading that is bold but lowercase, and so on. But new paragraphs are marked only by white space between lines, not a paragraph indent. Whereas you see here, there is no differentiation. They're just a series of paragraphs. 3 columns give you a more like a magazine style. It's more lighter reading, and you can bring in some other pictures, small boxes in that. Whereas here, the columns are not really very helpful. They are just monotonous kind of columns. New paragraphs. How do you signal new paragraphs? You can put either extra space between paragraphs, as has been done here, but then what happens when a paragraph begins a new page? You have extra space, but this is a paragraph, but what about this? If this were at the end of a page, because it has a full line, how can you tell whether a new paragraph is starting, which is not a good idea. Now, extra space, it has another problem. Now you see here, this heading, and then there is a paragraph. Next paragraph is separated by more space, which looks as though this heading applies only to this particular paragraph and not to the paragraphs that follow, which is again not what is desired. There should be all paragraphs belong to the same heading, and that should be visually signaled. Then we need a variety, a hierarchy of headings. And as you go from small to large, that is how we go. So footnotes, then body text, which is larger, headings, which is still larger, chapter title or article titles are even larger, and so on. So how do we signal different? How do we achieve this hierarchy? We can use space, we can use alignment, we can use different fonts, we can use size, we can use weight, or we can use posture. Any combinations of these we should use. We can also use color. Color is expensive to print, but on screen it is just fine. Now you see here, it's simple. We simply use the numbered paragraph. So 12.5 is one level, 12.5.1 is the next level, 12.5.1.1 is even a lower level. Or we can make this very large and in capital letters, whereas this we make small letters. We can also make headings continue in the same line after the heading, provided we make them bold. So that's also an option. So different styles. You see here, introduction is a heading, then materials, that's a level. So this left-hand column has only headings, which makes it very easy to scan. And it also gives us shorter lines. So that's a good way of designing. Or you can indent. So this is pulled out into the text, so it stands out. Chapter titles can be made even larger. We can use color. Now, first line after the heading should not have an indent. Second line, second paragraph, yes. Third paragraph, yes, but not the first paragraph. Or you could use alignment, provided the heading is short. So that also works well. But what you should avoid is having same space above and below a heading, because visually it doesn't connect whether this belongs to the previous paragraph or whether it's ahead of the next paragraph. So you should not do that. There should be more space above the heading and less space below the heading. That makes a heading very clearly linked to the matter that follows. You can see here, space is more above and less below. Whereas here they are too cramped, they are too close, which is not good. It's hard to distinguish. You see here, 2.3.1 is only indented, but otherwise it's the same size except that it is italics. We need more difference than that. You can see here, if it's centered, but it should be short. If it's too long, centered doesn't work. Now, do we really need these colons? We don't need these colons because its color is different. It is bold. So we don't need this colon. We can just put space and that is fine. So run-on headings can work without a punctuation. Now you see here, there are 3 levels. This has a dot. This doesn't have a dot. And this is too cramped. Although they are signaled, it is too dense. There should be more space for this. Also, the text size and heading size should be harmonious. It's not that headings are too large and the text is too small. That is not a good idea. And references don't have to be set in a single column because they have short lines. They can be spread over 2 columns or even 3 columns. Now here color is used well. You can see the histograms of different color. Color is called out for headings and tables and key values and so on. This is again a good use of color. Whereas here, it is simply these bands which are in color. So it's not really adding any degree to the usability of these headings. Now, don't use capital letters for every word, what we call the title case. No, it is not a good idea. And research shows, you can see here, research shows that the brain does not interpret lowercase and uppercase differently. So what is the point in using them for headings? Now, good typography also requires ligatures. You can see here, the letters are joined as one. That is a ligature. These are common ligatures. You can use that. You can see here how they are used. They make for uniform looking characters. Space between characters, that is important. You can see here it is better spaced. And how do you control that? See here, these are occupying the same width, whereas these are proportional. One is narrow, 8 is broad. Some go below the baseline, some rise above the baseline. They are good for mixing with capital letters. You can see capital letters equal height, small capitals like lowercase. So non-lining numbers are good for that. Also, the size of the font, we are not simply enlarging. You can see here, as font size becomes smaller, the letters become thicker and they get more space between letters. As size becomes bigger, the strokes become thinner and there's less space between words. So that is how it is done. You can see here is enlarged and it's not proportionate. All capitals also is not a good idea because it's harder to read. It's not a good idea to have all capital letters. Kerning, exact spacing between pairs of letters. You can see here, this is too close and this is too wide. You can see here, it's uniform. That is kerning. Proper kerning gives all letters are uniformly spaced. Then there's some more research. When you are shown a text which is set out properly, which is well designed, then it is less tiring and you are able to do better on some other task, because while reading properly set text, you were not taxed as much. It was easier for you. So that's a piece of research. Now, there used to be prizes for best design journals, Charlesworth Awards for journal design. So these are things that they pointed out. It's all matter of detail. Word spacing, hyphenation, text layout, all is important. Now you can see, for instance, a references list, how we can redesigned for easy use. So we can dispense with the initials of authors. We don't need them. We can have one column only for the names of authors and the year to match the citations. And we can have a separate column for bibliographic information. And we can make the titles of papers bold so that they stand out. Here is an example. You see, author and year one side, other information to next side, titles in bold. So you can think of good design. This is simply an example. Now I want to end with some good recommended websites and books. Practical Typography is a very good website. It's free. You can use that. Thinking with Type, all these we have been discussing, we can make use of those. This is a neurologist account, a neuroscientist account of how we read. That's very useful reading. Information design is again a very comprehensive look at all kinds of design. Fonts, why do they matter? That's a good book on this. There's manual typography. So all these are then guidelines for document designers. So these are all good. Simplification Center has a set of documents which are all useful in what we are discussing. So these are the bibliographic details of the books I'm recommending, if you can think of reading them. And lastly, I will leave you with this quote from Dr. Waller, who heads the Simplification Center. Good typography is good manners. It's making things easy for readers. So thank you very much. I will stop scaring at this point, and if you have any questions, I'll be happy to take questions. Thank you.